She walked up the stairs in silence, with the soup tray in her hands and her heart full of everything she couldn't say. In the living room, the Rich brothers discussed travel, business, real estate. But she was the one who stayed. She was the one who wiped the sweat from the forehead of the lady who could barely remember her own name. And it was there, in the stuffy room of a home that seemed to forget its own bonds, that he learned to love. Not out of desire, not out of beauty, but out of gratitude, out of presence, out of care. She was the maid, but in his eyes she became something that others could never buy. And when pain united them in a silence of medicine, he knew it wasn't pity, it was love. A love that didn't dare to be born until time forced it to blossom. But their story would never be accepted, and the price of silence would be higher than any inheritance. While the other children ran away from their responsibilities, she remained by the elderly woman's bedside, steadying pillows, organizing medications, whispering in her ear as if she were talking to a forgotten past. He watched from a distance, first with indifference, then with guilt, and then with a feeling he couldn't name. Each night, the sound of her footsteps in the hallway became a comfort. Each day, the care she offered with humility awakened in him an uncomfortable tenderness, a longing for something he never had. And when she cried alone in the bathroom, for something no one noticed, he understood that the most invisible woman in the house carried more dignity than his entire family combined. But what happens when the heart defies social codes, when gratitude turns to love and love demands courage? There are stories that unfold in the dark, where love must hide until destiny reveals it. If this story has already caught your attention in the first few seconds, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It makes all the difference in helping more people find stories like this. He noticed that the room had gotten colder since she left, not because of the open windows or the air conditioning, but because of that silent absence that lingers when someone essential leaves a space. The sound of the kettle never whistled at the same time again. The smell of chamomile tea never filled the upstairs room again. And his mother was only getting worse. The new nurse tried, the medicine was given, but there was something in the old woman's eyes, a tired emptiness, as if she was waiting for someone who knew how to touch her soul, not just her body. He climbed the stairs slowly, trying to repeat what she did, adjusting the pillows, cleaning the corners of her lips with cotton, but he felt that everything was wrong, mechanically correct, emotionally distant. It was in this scenario that he began to remembering her arriving early, her hair tied up in a mess, her steps light and determined, remembering the way she would place her hand on his mother's forehead and murmur, "Calm down, Mrs. Helen, it will pass soon." He didn't have the courage to say it, not with the same delicacy. She had something he and his brothers never learned, maybe because they never needed it. The house, once full of voices and business, was now just echoes and memories. The siblings went on with their lives, coming and going in a hurry, sending expensive flowers and cold caregivers. But she was the one who brought the simple roses from the backyard. She was the one who sat on the edge of the bed and told stories from her childhood that her mother didn't even remember telling. He thought it was gratitude, maybe pity, until the day she cried, not from pain, but from exhaustion. And yet she kept smiling as she left the room. That was the day something changed in him, when she went upstairs with the soup in her hands and left a silent note, saying she would be back later. She didn't come back. She was humiliated by her older sister, accused of things she didn't do, treated as if her presence was a nuisance, and no one defended her, not even him. The shame paralyzes him to this day. After that, the nights were long. His mother moaned. He tried to remember how she warmed the milk, how she sang softly in the hallway. He never paid enough attention. Now he wanted to learn everything, but it was too late. The woman he had never had the courage to look at as if she were an equal was now the only one who could save them from the emptiness. But he had lost her, or he thought he had, until fate, silent and stubborn, decided to give him a second chance. And in this story, even the most silent love ends up finding its voice. She would arrive early, even before the sun had painted the kitchen windows. She brought with her a scent of lavender and fresh bread, that seemed to contradict the sadness of the home she entered every day. She always wore the same hand-ironed white shirt and a navy blue apron that she left at home every now and then to be washed, and returned the next day. Mrs. Helen on her good days still called her by name. On her bad days she would only mumble indifferent sounds while she combed her fine hair with the patience of a daughter. She asked for nothing in return. She did not complain. She did not let anyone see the weariness she carried on her shoulders. She was just another maid, the others said. But he saw it, even if he didn't want to see it. It was during a cloudy morning, with his siblings arguing about who would get to the apartment in Manhattan, that he realized how much she filled what was missing there. His mother had a fever. The medicine wasn't helping, and it was she who took a damp cloth, dimmed the lights, and stayed by his bedside for hours, changing compresses and murmuring sweet words. While the other children avoided the room, saying that the hospital smell was too strong, she lit a small candle in the bathroom, just to hide the pain. He stood in the doorway, watching everything, not knowing what to do with the lump in his throat. He felt ashamed of himself, of never having realized how irreplaceable she was. Over time, he began to make excuses to be around. He would stop by the kitchen when she was making her mother's soups. He would ask if she needed help, even though he knew she was methodical and preferred to do it alone. One day she let him cut the potatoes. She smiled shyly, and he felt as if he had been given a rare privilege. It wasn't her beauty that held him captive. It was the way she treated the world, how she carried kindness in every gesture. While others treated her mother as an obligation, she cared for him as if she had loved someone like that. And maybe she had, but he never had the courage to ask. On Sundays, the house was emptier. His brothers were traveling. His grandchildren only showed up in photos. It was on those days that he saw her most. Coming up the stairs with soup, then with medicine, then with warm water, then with hope. He would stay at the top of the stairs watching, pretending to be on his cell phone but listening to everything. The way she said, "Stay strong, Mrs. Helen," the way she would adjust the pillows so her mother could see the sky through the window. No one else did that, not even him. And what had once been admiration turned into tenderness, a tenderness that he didn't know how to show, because he had never had to show it to anyone who wasn't like him. Because there, between the maid and the rich son, there was a social chasm that he himself helped to maintain. And yet in the silence of care some bridge began to be built, discreet, almost invisible, but present. It was on a Wednesday afternoon, as the sun filtered through the golden strips of curtains, that he saw her smile without realizing it. His mother was asleep, breathing hard, and she was quietly reading a passage from a book she had found on the shelf, something light, old, with the smell of time and yellowed pages. He didn't understand why she chose those children's stories, but when he saw Mrs. Helen's face soften with each word, he understood that what mattered here was not the plot, but the tone, the music of her voice, the memory of affection. And it was at that moment, when she looked up from the book and sighed sweetly, that the smile appeared, a tired smile but whole, a smile for no one. And it was then that he knew he was lost. In the days that followed, he began to hear the silences better, hers, the house's, his mother's. He discovered that the most important noises did not come from words, but from gestures, like the sound of water heating on the stove, or the soft clink of a spoon calmly stirring tea. And among these domestic rituals, she lived with a silent dignity that made him feel small. The woman who walked through the hallways without rushing, who adjusted the sheets before leaving the room, who left short messages on the refrigerator with handwritten notes. Everything about her was taken care of. She was a real presence. And he, accustomed to hurried, intense and disposable relationships, didn't know what to do with this presence that asked for nothing. One night, he went down to the kitchen in silence. It was late, and everyone was already asleep. He found her washing the dishes slowly, with her back turned, her hair tied up in a messy bun. He didn't call out to her. He just watched. And when she turned around, their eyes met, as if they were two old souls who had sought each other out in another time. She smiled. He couldn't. He just swallowed hard and asked if he wanted help. She shook her head, said she was almost done, and went back to scrubbing the last plate. The silence between them was thick, but not uncomfortable. It was as if they were talking without saying anything, as if they both knew there was something there, but didn't have the courage to touch it yet. From that day on, he began to keep little things she had forgotten: a hair clip left in the laundry room, a pair of clean socks. In the bathroom, a thin book left on the living room shelf. None of these things had any material value, but he treated them like relics. Sometimes he would touch them as if he were touching something sacred, because it was through these simple objects that she left her mark on the house, and he needed those marks to breathe. But she never crossed the line. Always discreet, always respectful, always serving with her eyes lowered. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of wisdom, maybe because she already knew that there, even if there was feeling, there was no room for it to flourish without causing a scandal. And yet, every day she went upstairs with the soup. Every day he waited for her without admitting it. Every day his heart beat faster, in the silence of the medicine and in the warmth of the care. It was on a Sunday morning, when the city seemed to be sleeping more soundly and the kitchen clock stopped at 2:45 in the morning, that Mrs. Helen's fever rose alarmingly. He woke up to a muffled noise, a groan coming from upstairs. He ran without thinking, and when he got to the room he found his mother trembling, her face red, her breathing shallow. For a second he was paralyzed. He called for his brothers, but no one answered. He called for the nurse, but it was the day off. Then he thought of her face, of the way she calmly resolved everything, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. But she was no longer there. He ran down to the kitchen and rummaged through the medicine cabinet. He found the medicine, yes, but he didn't know the doses. He tried to call the doctor, who didn't answer. He called the hospital, who told him to wait. His fever was rising, and he, shaking, held his mother's hand with guilt and despair. For the first time he felt real fear. Fear of losing the woman who, despite her mistakes, was his root. And along with the fear, an absurd longing for her, for the woman who knew what to do, for the cool touch of the towel she always used on the lady's forehead, for the calm voice that said, "Breathe, Mrs. Helen, breathe with me." Not knowing what else to do, he went to her room. It was empty, of course, but the smell still lingered there. He opened the closet where she kept her work clothes and found a drawer with old notebooks. One of them, a simple spiral-bound notebook with a blue cover, contained the notes she had made: medication doses, feeding times, the lady's reactions to the medicine, light recipes for feverish days, and even prayer notes. If things are difficult, calm Mrs. Helen's heart with rice water, a compress on her neck, and soft praise. It was almost a diary of care, a silent inheritance, an intimate Bible for those who learn to love through service. He followed her instructions, heating the water, changing the towel, singing softly a song that he vaguely remembered from his childhood, and as he cared for her, he felt a pain growing inside him, the pain of someone who recognizes someone's worth too late. The night was long, and at dawn, when the fever had subsided, he fell to the side of the bed exhausted, with tears in his eyes and her notebook on his lap. It was as if she had been there the whole time. That day, he decided to look for her, not just out of necessity, but out of regret, out of affection, out of something stronger, something he could no longer hide. She had left without a scene, without demands, without goodbyes, just the silence and dignity of someone who knew she wasn't welcome. But now he knew. He knew that if he wanted to fix anything, he had to bring her back, not just to the house, but to a place she should never have left, the center of what was still good in that family. That morning, after everything had passed, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that was cooling too quickly. The house was silent, but it wasn't peace. It was absence. It was as if the air had grown heavier since she'd been gone. His brothers were still asleep. None of them knew about his fever, his early morning hours, his desperation, and even if they had, they wouldn't have cared. He knew that. At most, They would call to see if the probate papers were ready. But there, between the refrigerator that still held the jam she'd made and the clock that showed the same wrong time as the night before, he stared at himself. It wasn't just their fault. It was his too, because he was there, watching everything happen. He saw when her sister accused her of theft without proof. He saw when no one defended her, when she walked out the door with her head down carrying the old bag she used every day. And he remained silent, because he didn't know what he felt yet, because he was afraid, because he didn't want to upset his family. And now the image of her leaving haunted him in every corner of the house. He tried to go about his day as normal, but everything seemed to be going wrong. The food the hired caretakers had was tasteless. The cleaning was cold, the voices strange. Mrs. Helen was getting worse without explanation, as if she was missing something that could not be bought with a salary. He began to have insomnia. He would get up at night and walk around the house looking for traces of her, as if he could find a piece of her presence in the air. Sometimes he would go to the front door and open it, as if she might appear. She did not appear, and he was beginning to understand. When someone who has nothing offers everything, the loss is always unbearable. He carried her notebook with him. He read and reread the short notes, the simple annotations, the details that only someone who loves can record. He began to think that perhaps what he felt was not just gratitude, because he missed her in the details, in the way she held the spoon, in the way she folded the towels, in the whispered prayer when his mother slept. He missed her like someone who misses home. And this feeling, no matter how much I tried to deny it, did not fit into any social drawer. It was deep. It was affection. It was love. But there was a problem. Shame. How could he look at her now? How could he tell her what he felt after he hadn't said anything? How could he face his own cowardice? That was what was eating him up inside. The fear of not being worthy. The fear that she had already moved on, or worse, that she had closed the door forever. His brothers would certainly mock him. Society would judge him. But at that moment, none of that mattered. Because when someone becomes essential, the rest becomes noise. It was time to do something, to get out of the guilt and act. Because sometimes, when the heart understands late, the soul can still run after it. She had left without drama, no visible tears, no suitcase, just with the worn bag on her shoulder, her head down, and a silence that said more than any speech. The accusation came on a sultry late afternoon, when the house was already carrying the weight of a tense day. The older sister had found a missing necklace, an object that never had sentimental value, but that in her hands became ammunition. She said it could only have been the maid. He said it out loud in front of everyone, and although he knew it was a lie, although he was sure she would never do that, he said nothing. He remained silent, silent as if he were consenting. She heard everything. She looked at him for a second, as if asking for help without words, but he looked away, not because he didn't believe her, but because he couldn't stand the conflict, because he feared scandal, because he was still a prisoner of a family that confused status with truth. And then she went. She didn't argue. She didn't try to defend herself. She picked up her bag, fixed her hair in a mechanical gesture, and crossed the kitchen door for the last time. He didn't follow her. In the following days, the house breathed a brutal absence. The noises changed. The sound of the cutlery was drier. The hallways longer. His mother seemed more agitated. The smell of the meals changed, and his heart began to tighten. A bitter guilt that grew in every corner where she used to be. He saw the dish towel she had forgotten on the clothesline, the recipe book still on the microwave, a hair elastic left on the sink in the guest bathroom, small traces of a presence that was missed more than he imagined possible. He tried to contact her, but she didn't answer. He tried to go to her house, but she turned back halfway. He didn't know what he would say. He didn't know how to make amends. He only knew that her silence hurt more than 1,000 words, because that silence was full of everything he didn't have the courage to offer. It was the cruelest answer, that she respected him enough not to come back. His mother got worse. The caregivers couldn't handle it. His brothers talked about hospitalization. But he knew, deep down, that no hospital would bring back what that woman offered. True care. Love without compromise. A presence that was firm and gentle at the same time. He began to carry the guilt on his face. His eyes were sunken, his beard was unshaven, his voice was lower, and a longing that made him wake up at dawn, wanting to hear her footsteps in the hallway. It was one morning when he entered his mother's room and smelled the soulless disinfectant that he understood. He needed her, not as an employee, as someone who had become part of his life, part of him. Was it too late? Maybe. But he could no longer bear the silence he had created with his cowardice. It was by chance, or maybe not. Maybe it was fate giving him the first push, testing whether he still had time to fix what he had destroyed with his own silence. It was late afternoon when he rushed out to buy some medicine that his mother needed. The caregiver forgot to tell him in advance, and in that small pharmacy on the corner, there was a line, heat, and an old radio playing instrumental music. He went in. Impatiently, running his hand through his hair, distracted, until he heard that voice. Short, polite, firm. It was her. She was asking the pharmacist about a specific type of supplement, explaining that the lady she was caring for was having trouble swallowing large capsules. He stopped. His heart raced in a ridiculous, childish way, and when she turned her face, time stopped. The two stared at each other for a second that lasted an eternity. She didn't smile. Neither did he, but her eyes sparkled with surprise while his begged for a gesture, a bridge, anything other than contempt. He approached slowly. He didn't know what to say. "Hi," was all he could manage. She lowered her eyes and murmured back. It wasn't anger, it was protection. A wall she had to build in a hurry to survive the humiliation, and he saw it. He felt it, and it hurt more than he expected. He tried to explain himself, but his words came out short, embarrassed, and stumbling. He said his mother had gotten worse, that no one could take care of him like she did, that she missed him. She didn't answer right away. She finished paying for her purchase, thanked the clerk, and turned to him with a calm, almost professional demeanor. She said that she was now working with another lady, in a house further away, that she preferred to keep her distance from environments where she was not respected, that the lost necklace had been found behind the bookshelf, but no one had apologized to her. She said this in a calm voice with her eyes fixed, and he felt each word as a clean and fair blow. He asked for forgiveness, for his cowardice, for his silence, for his omission. He said he didn't know how to act, but that now he knew what he felt. And he was sincere. For the first time he looked at her as if he were looking at someone as an equal, not as a maid, but as a woman he had let slip away. She listened to him, in silence. Then she said she wouldn't go back to the house. That she would only go back if it were for her. Not for work, not out of obligation, but out of choice. He understood. And in that brief reunion, among the shelves of painkillers and vitamins, a decision began to dawn. She was no longer just his mother's caregiver. She was the only one who had taken care of him without him realizing it. 2 days after their reunion at the pharmacy, he stopped the car on the narrow street where she now worked. He waited a few minutes inside the vehicle, observing the simple entrance to the house, the peeling white fence, the plants growing haphazardly in the garden. He didn't know exactly what he would say. He had rehearsed the speech 1,000 times, but it all sounded false when repeated out loud. He was there for her. For her mother, yes, but also for himself. For everything that had been stuck in his throat for years. He got out of the car with sweaty hands and rang the doorbell. She answered the door herself. No uniform, no rush, no makeup. Her hair tied up any which way, her eyes attentive, surprised. He asked to talk just for a few minutes. She hesitated. Then she opened the gate. They sat on a wooden bench in the yard, in the shade of a tree. He was silent for a moment. She waited, and then he spoke. He said he wasn't asking her to come back the way she was before. He said he understood what they had done to her, and that his silence was cowardice, that she deserved much more than an apology. But even so, he had to ask. Not because of his mother, not out of pity, but because he realized that the house without her was an empty structure, a home without a soul, and that he was willing to change everything if she said yes. She took a deep breath. She said she was scared, that she didn't want to go back to being seen as the trusted employee that everyone tolerated with condescension, that she didn't fit into that world, that even though she missed Mrs. Helen, she couldn't go back to a place where she had been hurt and discarded as if she were nothing. He replied that this time it would be different, that she would have autonomy, respect, freedom, that her mother wouldn't stop calling her during her sleep, that the caregivers couldn't calm her down, that he himself couldn't, and that above all he wasn't there just because of his mother. He was there for her, for the woman who taught him more about love than all the books he had read. She looked down. She said she didn't know, that it still hurt. But he saw something shimmer at the edge of her gaze. It wasn't rejection. It was fear of believing. He asked her again, his voice low, almost like a prayer. He said that if she came back, she wouldn't come back as before. She would come back as someone he didn't want to lose anymore. She accepted, calmly, with limits. She said she would come back for Mrs. Helen, that she would stay for a while, that he should not confuse things. But he knew that that yes was more than it seemed. It was the first brick, rebuilt in the bridge he had burned with his omission, and as she closed the gate behind him with a slight nod, he felt that there was still time. Time to do everything differently. She returned silently, as she had left. Without a suitcase, without an announcement. She only appeared the next morning, with her usual bag over her shoulder and her eyes downcast as she entered through the back door. The new cook watched her with discomfort. The caretakers greeted her with relief, and Mrs. Helen, even weakened, murmured a barely audible sound, a name mixed with heavy breathing. It was her. It was for her that the mother's heart beat more calmly. The next few days were like relearning the house. She avoided the other children, kept her distance, did her work with the same precision as before, but now there was something more restrained, more guarded. He watched her discreetly. Sometimes he offered to help, and she accepted with short nods. Sometimes he left a flower on her mother's nightstand, and she understood the gesture. They didn't say what they felt, but there was a silent dance between them, a timid attempt at healing. It was on one of those quiet afternoons, while they were tidying Mrs. Helen's room, that they found the letter. It was tucked between the old sheets, tucked inside a beige envelope, with her name handwritten on it. To her, the one who stayed. He thought it was strange. She turned pale. She sat up slowly on the edge of the bed and opened the paper. With trembling hands. The handwriting was fragile but firm. The mother began by saying that she knew, that she had always known, that even when she pretended to be asleep, she heard the whispered prayers, felt the care in the touch, recognized the affection that came without interest. She said that in the midst of so much coldness, she was the one who brought warmth, and that, if she could choose who would be by her side in her final days, she would choose 1,000 times the woman the world called a maid. The letter went on to reveal that he had left clear instructions in his will, that he didn't just want to reward her, he wanted to recognize her, that he had left her a share of his house, a symbolic but significant amount of money, and a request that she take care of the son he didn't yet know how to love properly, but who had a good heart. She read it to the end, in silence. Her eyes were watery, her mouth trembling. He knelt in front of her, as if asking for forgiveness and shelter at the same time. He said he didn't know about the letter, that his mother had never told him, but that it made sense, because only she knew how to see what was most human in that woman that everyone else pretended not to see. In that stuffy room between folded sheets and silent memories, the two understood something bigger. Their mother, even though she was leaving, had left the love with whom she had always belonged. The day of the reading of the will arrived, with the sky overcast, as if even the weather knew that something heavy was hanging in the air. The family gathered in the main room, a room they had rarely used in life, but which now served as the stage for the inheritance. All the children came, dressed in ties, cold, sitting in expensive armchairs with practiced looks. She remained standing on the sidelines as she always had, with her hands clasped in front of her and her head slightly lowered. He, beside her, could feel the tension pulsing under his skin. The lawyer began with formalities, documents, dates, protocols. Then his voice changed. Mrs. Helen had left unusual instructions. She had distributed her assets among her children with some justice, but she had reserved something special for the woman who had cared for her until the end. The house where she lived, a modest but significant sum, and a letter attached to the will in which she said that blood ties do not always know how to love like those of the soul. The silence that followed was violent. The oldest sister was the first to react. She asked if it was a joke. The middle brother shook his head in disbelief. The youngest made a caustic joke about being made a fool of by an employee. She said nothing. She didn't blink. She didn't lower her eyes. She remained motionless with a dignity that made the others seem like spoiled children. He stood up, and it was with that simple gesture that the rupture began. He said, in a firm voice, that he supported every line of what his mother had left, that whoever was bothered should rethink their own merits, that she had not asked for anything and, on the contrary, she had been humiliated, and yet she had stayed until the end, lovingly caring for those whom her own children had abandoned for convenience. His sister became angry. She accused him of being emotionally involved. The others murmured, stood up, and gestured, but he didn't move. He just stood there beside her, for the first time in public, making it clear to everyone that his mother's choice would not be undone, not by law or by force. She, still silent, held the envelope with her mother's letter in both hands. She hadn't asked for the house. She hadn't asked for the money. But now he had something that neither of them could take away, the truth acknowledged, his name written on a piece of paper made of love, his honor restored, and perhaps for the first time, his gaze whole, free, firm. That moment split the family in two, but it also stitched together with threads of silence and justice, a new story, a story that would not be told at family dinners but in the eyes that finally allowed themselves to meet without guilt. The next morning she made him coffee the way she used to, with fresh bread, warm milk, and silence. He came downstairs and stood in the kitchen doorway, watching her for a moment. She was calmer, but there was a new weariness in her eyes, a weariness that came not from the body, but from the soul, from the weight of being dragged into the center of a war you never asked to fight. He tried to smile. She just poured the coffee, set the cup on the table, and said bluntly, "I'm going to go." He didn't answer right away. He stared at the steam rising from the drink, as if there was some hidden answer there. She continued, "I don't want a fight. I don't want an inheritance. I don't want to live surrounded by dirty looks and whispers. I stayed because she asked me to when she was alive, because she needed me. But now she needs me." He tried to argue. He said things could be different, that it wasn't like before, that he was by her side now. But she shook her head sweetly. "You are, but the world isn't, and I wasn't born to live in the shadow of doubt." That afternoon she packed her few things. She folded her clothes calmly, put her notebooks in her bag, and ran her fingers over Mrs. Helen's photos as if she were saying goodbye without rushing. The house seemed to be holding her back with its corners, as if the walls wanted to keep her from leaving. But she had to go, not out of pride, but for survival, because there are wounds that only time can heal, and she needed that time away from there. He led her to the gate. They walked in silence down the side passage. The garden, which she had helped to tend, was in full bloom. She paused for a moment before a vase of lilies and touched a petal. Then she looked at him with a sad smile. She said, "You know where to find me, but this time it must be for you, not for her, not out of guilt." He nodded. He tried to hold her hand, but she only rested her fingers on his for a second and let go. He got into the car with dignity and drove off without looking back. He stood at the gate for a long time. The scandal, which everyone had been waiting for, never came. There were no headlines, no legal battles, no family dinners. There was just absence. An absence that screamed. And while the brothers continued to pretend to be normal, he learned to deal with silence. The same silence that once paralyzed him was now where he tried to find it again, not in things but in choices. Time passed as it does when life slows down without warning, unhurriedly, but leaving its mark. She left at the end of summer, and when fall came he still kept her place at the breakfast table. He told himself it was out of habit. But the truth is that the silence that remained in the house was different from all the others. It was a silence that knew her name. He took care of his mother alone in the first few days, even with the nursing staff present. He made a point of arranging the pillows, heating the soup as she did, leaving the window ajar to let in the morning light. He wanted to keep alive the things she had taught him, not only for Mrs. Helen but for himself. Little by little he realized that he was repeating her gestures without realizing it, that he spoke to his mother in the same way, that he was beginning to understand what it means to love. Patiently. Visits from his brothers became rare. Inventory meetings ended. The fight stopped because there was nothing left to take. All he had left was his house, his memories, and time. Time, that slow and unforgiving teacher who taught in every detail the value of what was lost. He kept the notes she left before she left. He found some hidden in books, little phrases, shopping lists, simple reminders. Change the top sheet, tea at 4 p.m. Don't forget to smile. He began collecting them. In a wooden box that he left in her room, now locked. He would go there sometimes, alone, as if visiting a shrine. He would sit on the edge of the bed and listen. There was no sound, but there was presence. He tried to write to her a few times. He always stopped halfway. He didn't know how to start. He didn't want to sound like a man apologizing, or like a lost son without a guide. He wanted to be someone new, someone worthy of the love she carried in her eyes. His mother left him in the winter on a silent night, with her hands in his and a quiet whisper on her lips. He thought he heard her name with her last breath. He buried his mother with dignity, without grand ceremonies, just white flowers and silence. After that, the house became too big. He sold the furniture, kept the essentials, and left her room intact. He started walking more, visiting places she mentioned, listening to the songs she hummed. He gradually discovered who she was beyond the walls of the house. He learned about her walks at dawn, her simple church choir, her visits to a nursing home on Sundays. She did everything in silence. And it was there, in the silence, that he found her again. But there was something he hadn't done yet. Something his heart had put off, both in fear and hope. Looking for her, not as a boss, not as someone who regretted it, but as a man willing to start over. Not from scratch, but from where love had been interrupted. Time didn't hurt as much, but it still weighed heavily. He began to live with less. The house became emptier, his commitments fewer. He discovered that he didn't need much to carry on, just truth. And the only truth that still accompanied him was the memory of her. Not as an idealized longing, but as something that persisted in the present, even without being within reach. It was late in the afternoon, almost spring, that he received the invitation. A simple letter with no sender, but with handwriting that he would recognize even with his eyes closed. Saturday 5 p.m., St. Agnes Church, choir. That was it, and a simple drawing of a flower in the corner of the paper. He arrived a few minutes early. The small church in the center of the old quarter was full of simple people, and the wooden benches held more stories than any luxurious hall. He sat in the back, trying not to draw attention to himself. When the choir began to sing, he recognized her voice immediately, firm, but sweet. It wasn't a solo, but there was something in her voice that filled the room in a way no one else could. It was as if she was singing to someone, and maybe she was. After the introduction, he hesitated. He thought about leaving. He thought that perhaps that invitation wasn't really an invitation, but just a gesture of peace. But before he could get up, he saw her walking toward him, alone, serene, wearing a light dress and a small smile, the same smile she had when she cared for her mother with a damp cloth and a hope that no one could see. She sat down beside him. They didn't speak right away. Silence, as always, was their first language. Then she looked at him with eyes that were free of anger. She said simply, "You came." He said he didn't know if he was welcome, and she said, "He always was." I just didn't know it yet. They walked together along the old stone sidewalk, like two acquaintances who had not seen each other for a long time, but whose steps still remembered each other's rhythm. He talked about his mother. He told her about the last night, about the letter he had kept, about the room he had kept as it was. She listened. Sometimes she smiled, sometimes she just nodded. They stopped in front of a flower stand. He bought a small bouquet of lilies, the flowers she tended in the family garden. He handed them to her without saying anything. She took them carefully, smelled the petals, and then did something that completely disarmed him. She took his hand. For the first time there, on the simple street, in front of ordinary people, she took his hand as if to say, "We have nothing left to hide." There was no kiss, no declaration, just a slow walk to the little square next door. They sat on a wooden bench, like two survivors of a story that almost wasn't. She rested her head on his shoulder. He closed his eyes, and there, amidst the sound of the birds and the light wind at the end of the day, they both understood that love doesn't need to be shouted to be whole. That man, previously surrounded by luxury and absences, was now content with her presence. And she, who had once been invisible in a house too big for her own heart, was now seen, recognized, loved. And when he looked at her and whispered, "I'm sorry it took me so long to see," she responded with her gaze. A gaze filled with everything he had spent his entire life searching for. Karma sometimes doesn't come as punishment. It comes as a lesson, as silence, as a reunion. If this story touched you, click on the link to help us reach more. Hearts, subscribe to the channel so as not to miss the next stories, and comment below. True love has no social class. We want to know what this story awakened in you, and now don't leave yet. The video that is appearing on your screen will stir your emotions even more. Click and continue with us. You deserve to feel all of this until the end.